Are you taking AP European History? If so, you got Tom Richey right here to help you out through the whole process. Tom, what are we going to be covering in today's session?
Hey, John, this morning we are going to be, or I guess it just turned afternoon, we are going to be looking at how to put together, how to set up a DBQ and looking through it efficiently using a method that I've recently termed the buddy system. And so just going through and figuring out, and this is for students really, like there are some students, if you feel like, hey, I'm already getting 7s on the DBQ, I'm not pressed for time or anything like that. This is one of those things that, this may or may not, I think setting up any DBQ is going to be helpful, but this is going to be especially for people who are in a position where they are, thinking, hey, I'm still running out of time. And so how do I, slap some documents together and make arguments and go with it? Okay, so that's really what I'm going to be working on today, is just efficiently setting up a DBQ and saving time, especially for students that feel like they're overwhelmed.
Wonderful. Well, Tom, I'm going to hang out in the chat with everyone. If you like this video, press that like button, subscribe to our channel, and thank you for joining us.
Okay, and John, I'm going to go ahead and send a link that can be put, I suppose, in the video description. So I'll go ahead and send that over there in the chat. And it looks like I've also got a link where I can look at the YouTube comments. Okay, so we are there. All right, so going from there, let me go ahead and also I can put this link to the Google Drive document that I've created here. All right, so going from here, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and get into this. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we are going to be looking at a DBQ I've actually just updated, okay, because this is something that I had for the 2020 exam, but I've added a couple of documents to give us a full DBQ on enlightened absolutism. Now, remember that anytime we're doing the DBQ, that if for AP Euro at least. Now, remember, APUSH, it can be a little more complex because there can be a variety of prompt formats. But in this case, with AP Euro, it is always going to be an either or particularly more this or more that. Okay. And so as far as this goes, when we're looking at something like enlightened absolutism, which in some cases, some people may see this as a little bit of an oxymoron or something like that. Enlightenment and absolutism, they don't necessarily at first glance seem to play together well, but at the same time, we do have this phenomenon in our course where in the 18th century, there are absolute rulers who are trying to, they're trying to come out and apply the principles of the Enlightenment. Now, remember, for any of these DBQs, it's going to be helpful if you have a background here. So, of course, if you don't know anything about enlightened absolutism, this is going to be a little bit tough. But hopefully, you'll have studied for your exam. You've still got time, even if you're taking paper pencil. And so with that, you should know that enlightened absolutists, they championed typically toleration of religious minorities, reform of institutions, and of course they were absolutist. They're typically not setting up representative bodies or anything like that. And then finally, patronage of the philosophes. Now, this is, I call this trap, okay? So enlightened absolutism is a trap. Again, toleration of religious minorities, reform of institutions, absolutism, and patronage of the philosophes. Okay, so that's going to be something that is very important. And so evaluate whether enlightened absolutists were more enlightened or more absolutist in the 18th century. Now, when we look at the AP Euro DBQ rubric, this is something that when we're looking for this, okay, so when we're looking for the AP Euro DBQ rubric, then what we're going to find here is that, most of the points can be scored using only 3 documents. Now, with that, when I see 3, I read 4. Okay, so this is a point that really the only reason you should be going for this point where it is supporting an argument with 6 documents That is if you are one of those people who typically understands all of the documents, and there's nothing wrong. I mean, really, it's not only that there's nothing wrong with it, but you want to go into this exam knowing your strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so if on almost all of the practice DBQs you misunderstand or are confused by 2 or 3 documents, then the odds of you just magically understanding all 7 documents on the exam are probably slim. And so when it comes down to it, a lot of you are in 10th grade taking your first AP Euro or your first AP history exam. So with this, I think it's very important to decide whether you're going for this point or not. Now, the other 2 document points, note here, accurately describes the content of at least 3 documents. Now, remember, I read 4 there because you want insurance. If you only use 3 documents and you mess one up, then that's not going to be good for you. Now, then for at least 3 documents explains how or why the document's point of view, purpose, historical situation, and or audience is relevant to the document. Now, that's something there that we can do that using 3 or 4 documents. Okay, so you want to decide about that. And there's a certain amount of liberation for those of you who've been running out of time. When you think about, you know what, I'm just looking for my 4 best documents, and then I'm going to put those together in 2 groups of 2 that's going to make a cup, the buddy system. I'm going to buddy 2 documents, and I'm going to buddy these other 2 documents, and then I'm going to make arguments that I'm going to put together in a thesis. Okay, and let me see here. I've got, okay, so as far as access to the document, let me see if I can find a direct link. Okay, so with that, if y'all want to access this document directly, just give me just a second to make a link for you. Okay, so that's going to be just a short amount of time here. Let me run into DBQ LEQ, just need to run in where I've got this, and I'm going to make y'all a link here. Okay, so let me go ahead and getting a link for you now. All right, so let's go in here, and here is the document. Oh, okay. So the link to the DBQ, and then of course that Google Drive that I just set up for you. Let me go ahead and, Google wants to make sure that we've got security and all that. Okay, so now anyone with the link can view the Google document that I've set up here. So we're good on that. And y'all even got a link to the DBQ that I'm about to show you. So with that, let's go ahead and share again. And think about in terms of the main thing is you can get, you can do very well on this exam, scoring 5 points on the DBQ. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be writing a 5-point, what I see as a 5-point DBQ. And so we're going to start off with a thesis. We're going to use 4 documents in order to make 2 distinct arguments. Now, if we're not going for the 6 document point, or the complex understanding point, then what we're going to do here is we're going to use 4 documents to make 2 distinct arguments. We're going to also add in an additional piece of specific historical evidence. Now, one thing that I will typically recommend for students who are taking the digital exam. Okay, now if it's paper pencil, this would be a little bit messy, but if you're taking the digital exam, I typically recommend starting off your essay by just stating your thesis, that is all you put in the introduction. And then you're going to put your 2 body paragraphs and then restate your thesis. And then you'll scroll back up and you will put in your contextualization last. Okay, that's a strategy that I think just cleans things up. And also, if you run out of time, then okay, you've got 4 points. You weren't quite able to do contextualization, but 4 points is still a passing score. Now, remember, some of you who are already getting 6s and 7s on the DBQ, this is going to be something. It's always good to set up a DBQ, but I realize that I've got a couple of audiences audiences here, but the main audience that I want to help right now, a few weeks out from the exam, are those who are still struggling to put this together. So as far as this DBQ here, evaluate whether enlightened absolutists were more enlightened or more absolutist in the 18th century. Now, as far as getting the gist of a document, there are things that you need to think about. Now, if you're taking the paper pencil, you're going to be making notes on the document itself. Now, typically what I will do here when I'm doing a paper pencil DBQ is I've got, I'll make annotations and notes on the document, light annotations and notes. I'll think of any outside evidence this may remind me of or anything like that. And then over here on the, to the left of the document marker here, then that's where I'm going to put the argument. Is it more enlightened or is it more absolutist? Okay, how am I going to use this document to describe, like, okay, are they more enlightened or are they more absolutist? Because that's the question I'm trying to answer. So, and not necessarily which side of the fence is the author on, but how am I going to use this document? Now, for this, if you look to the right of the document marker, then this is where I'm going to put any of my POV, cap, hip, whatever we're calling this, where here are some ways that I could analyze the documents. Okay, so this is something that we might want to do there. Now, if you're taking the digital exam, now Marco Learning will have an annotation guide for you before the digital exams start. Remember, right now, from what I can tell, the majority of students this year will be taking paper pencil exams. So just understand that as soon as we get past the first week of May and we see that students have taken their paper pencil exams, then we're going to be switching gears, and everything we do from there on is going to target the digital exam. So just understand that you are going to, just make sure you are, getting updates from Marco Learning so that you'll be able to do that. Go to marcolearning.com. In fact, I'd recommend for anybody, if you go to marcolearning.com/AP Euro, there are several guides here there are several study guides that you can download. And when you sign up to download one of those, it will put something on your screen. Now mine, because I've already signed up, it's going to that. But basically, if you download one of these things, it'll get your email address and you will get updates from Marco Learning that are specific to the AP Euro exam this year. So make sure that you take advantage of that opportunity, download some of these study guides, or better yet, all of them, and you will be able to, you'll be in the loop as things are happening. So as far as this goes, if I'm doing this digitally, now remember, if I'm taking paper pencil, I'm going to do my annotations on the document, okay? But when Marco Learning sends you, and again, make sure you're signed up for Marco Learning's email list, because something like this will be sent directly to your email, that there's going to be the document number. Now, the first thing that we're going to have to decide here is whether to use or strike the document, okay? And I think about, y'all will strike, all right. That y'all are going to be in a situation kind of like jury selection, okay? When you become an adult and a functioning citizen, every once in a while, you're going to have jury duty. And what happens is both attorneys go in with an idea of the kind of juror they're looking for. And so as jurors are, as somebody's name is drawn or their number is drawn, then, each attorney is going to decide, I either want to seat that person as a juror, or I want to use one of my strikes. Okay. And so as far as this goes, you can strike up to 3 documents. Now, more than 3 strikes, you're out. Okay. So as far as that, or you can look at it, if we want to use the baseball analogy, you can, take a pitch. You can just watch it go by. That's not a pitch that I like. And when you think about that, you can just let 3 of those, go by and you're fine. So with that, you're going to decide, do I understand what this document is saying, and can I use it to support an argument? And if you don't understand the document, it's going over your head, as long as you're not getting carried away and striking the majority of them, you're fine. So the first thing, as far as saving time, don't try when you're going through here, if there's a document that you're like, man, this is so confusing, just get away from it, let it go. And that's going to be a big time saver if you're not trying to, read all the documents and like, gosh, this is confusing, but I really want to figure it out. Don't do that. Okay. And then here, and again, this is like a digital format here, a brief summary of the document. Okay, so basically a brief summary of the document's content, and we're talking about just a sentence or so, nothing that's and basically the brief summary of the, I'm going to note here, let's think about this, relevant portion, so the document, and what I'm going to note here, or relevant portion thereof. Okay, so that's something, or relevant portion thereof. Now, I was actually having a conversation with Tim from the Garden of English. He's got a YouTube channel catered to like English language, and he was talking about, how the documents there, you're actually, or the sources rather, that you are. Really going through them, and you're not necessarily just picking from them like you are here. Now, of course, I don't teach that subject, so don't quote me on that. But as far as this goes, when we're looking here, or relevant portion thereof. Okay, so the document, a brief summary of the document, or relevant portion thereof. Okay, and so you're going to put something brief there. Now, argument supported. Okay, so argument supported, and then maybe have a little, why from there. But what argument does this document support? And then finally, what can I do as far as, like POV, cap, hip. Okay, and that's what I'm doing here, and I'm trying to do this for, like I was saying, at least 4 documents. Okay, so this is what we're setting up. Now, Marco Learning will have something that is a bit more formal for you. Okay, so this is something that you'll want to note there, and that this is something that will be coming to you, digital exam takers. Y'all go ahead and y'all can say in the chat, are you preparing to take a paper pencil exam, or are you preparing to take a digital exam? That would be very good information for us to have as far as who's watching. Okay, so going from there, let's go ahead and take a look at document 1. Okay, so we see here that Charles II. Baron de Montesquieu. Now, this is somebody, a great example here of why you should AP Euro course and exam description 2020. If we're looking at the Enlightenment, okay, so just a little tip for you here, Montesquieu. Now, Montesquieu does not appear in the blue box. Okay, so where we're going to see Locke, Rousseau, Voltaire, Diderot, we see them here in the blue box, meaning that these guys, you should know who they are. Like, you can be accountable for them on the multiple choice. Now, what we want to note here is there is Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws, which is also useful for AP Government, by the way, and even AP US History. It's just a good thing to know. Very influential in forming the United States Constitution. But Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws is over here in this illustrative examples column. Now, note also that Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws could also be used in a stimulus-based multiple choice question. That's another thing that we can see here, is there could be an SBMC that is going to, quote from Montesquieu, and they'll say, well, you didn't have to know that, you just had to know about the Enlightenment. But knowing the people in these, these columns here, it's something that, or at least some of it, I wouldn't focus too much on like everything. Now, one thing I can note here as well is they tend to start off with, notice that they're not in alphabetical order. I'm just kind of putting this out there. They seem to kind of be in order of significance. So it's like, Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws would be typically more often seen than like Beccaria, on crimes and punishments. But then, noting that the Enlightenment was about getting rid of torture as a punishment and a means of admissible evidence. You know, in the United States and the Western world today in general, that evidence that was gotten under torture is not admissible. Before the Enlightenment, torture was a way to find out if somebody was telling the truth. And so with this, it's good to think about at least the first one. So if you thought Montesquieu, Mary Wollstonecraft, and again, what you've got here is Wollstonecraft and Condorcet. These are both people who challenged like Rousseau's views on women in the public sphere, but you don't necessarily have to know them both. Wollstonecraft, I would think, would be the most important. Coffee houses, we definitely hear more you know, about than anything else. So I would say here, there's definitely, you know, I would say out of here, the physiocrats might be the most important. And I don't even know who this is, okay? But I know who David Hume is. Now, David Hume's kind of out there anyway. But as far as that goes, when you're looking at this column, think about like under each heading, looking at the first one, because it looks to me like they are definitely thinking in terms of, okay, this is, you know, this is going to be the most significant in this column. So just to think about that, it's going to be to your advantage if you already, oh, I know that guy. I know Montesquieu. He's the guy with the separation of powers and checks and balances. So note this, in every government, there are three sorts of power: the legislative, the executive in respect to things dependent on the law of nations, and the executive in regard to things that depend on the civil law. Now, as far as that, he's going into two executives here. But the political liberty of the subject is a tranquility of mind arising from the opinion of each person has of his safety. In order to have this liberty, it is requisite the government be constituted so as one man not be afraid of another. When the legislative and executive powers are united in the same person or in the same body of magistrates, there can be no liberty, because apprehensions may be considered lest the same monarch or senate should enact tyrannical laws to execute them in a tyrannical manner. So when we're looking at this, you know, Montesquieu is a French philosopher, or philosophe, as we would say in the course. And so looking at this, that Montesquieu, when we're saying here, I mean, he is definitely not a fan of enlightened absolutism. Okay, so we've got a philosopher here that is not a fan of enlightened absolutism. I think this is a pretty straightforward document. You know, we can use this one here. And then when we think about a brief summary of the document, okay, so what we're noting here is that, you know, basically freedom cannot exist, okay, when you know, one person or group holds all the power, because it makes people afraid. Okay, so basically we have here that this is absolutist, okay, because basically you know, he does not believe. Okay, so Montesquieu does not believe, and you don't have to write all of this, I'm kind of showing you my thought process here. Montesquieu does not believe that you know, that it is possible, okay, so it is possible to have both absolutism and freedom. Okay, so this is something absolutist. And then I would note here that, you know, Montesquieu, if you know like historical context, okay, so some historical context, Montesquieu you know, was one of the best known political philosophers of the Enlightenment. Okay, and then you could note there that, you know, had an influence. Okay, so so you can even note his influence of, you know, on the United States and the founding fathers and all of that. That gives you some historical context. One of the most best known political philosophers of the Enlightenment. So his view should carry weight. Okay, this is basically also, we're going into like some POV as well. I would say that you're kind of going into historical context and also POV, making an authority, okay, an authority argument. Now, One thing to note here is if we're not thinking about going through here and using all 7, but how could we find Montesquieu a buddy? Okay, now this is where you might think about just going through these documents and just seeing where they're coming from. Okay, so as I'm going here and I'm looking at these, these documents from like a bird's eye view. Okay, a French ambassador, Charles III, King of Spain, Joseph II, Holy Roman Emperor. Now, one thing I might note here is 4 and 5. These could possibly be buddies. These are both people who are monarchs. So that's something to think about here, that 4 and 5 look like they could be buddies. And see, I can do this without even reading the documents. Okay, like I can look here and kind of think, okay, I could buddy those up. Document 6, Immanuel Kant, Prussian philosopher. What is enlightenment? Now, we do see a philosopher here, so that's something that we might want to consider there. Now, when we look at document 6, the enlightenment requires nothing. This enlightenment requires nothing but freedom, and the most innocent of all may be called freedom. Freedom to make public use of one's reason in all matters. Now I hear the cry from all sides, do not argue. The officer says, do not argue drill. The tax collector, do not argue pay. The pastor, do not argue belief. Only one ruler in the world says, argue as much as you please, but obey. Okay, now you think about this Prussian philosopher, this should be cueing in as some historical context, possibly Frederick the Great. Okay, we find restrictions on freedom everywhere, but which restriction is harmful to enlightenment? Which restriction is innocent and which advances enlightenment? I reply, the public use of one's reason must be free at all times. This alone can bring enlightenment to mankind. Now, again, another time-saving thing. If you've already halfway through the document realized, okay, I have enough here that I can note, if we're thinking like, okay, only one ruler in the world says argue as much as you please, but obey, you may have picked up that he's making a reference to Frederick the Great. And then Frederick the Great, remember, if we're looking at our outside knowledge and that's there, then we're thinking, okay, this is, a nod at Frederick the Great's, policy of basically, letting people have any, religion that they want, right? Of religious toleration. So as he goes on, remember, it's very rare that there's going to be a true plot twist. Okay. So as matters now stand, it is still far from true that men are of one capable of using their own reason in religious matters. Still, we have some obvious indications. So one thing we note here is I could even use this. So we look at document 6. Okay, so we're going to go all the way to document 6, and we're going to see that Immanuel Kant, okay, so we're going to say here, Kant, says that freedom is all that is necessary for enlightenment, and that, his ruler, okay, which of course that is Frederick the Great, if we're thinking about historical context, Frederick the Great's toleration policies, okay. And then so that of his ruler, that his ruler allows freedom, freedom to use one's reason in public. Okay, so note here, Frederick the Great's religious toleration policies and and guarantee of intellectual freedom. Now, one thing we might want to note here is another piece of historical context. We note that Frederick did not allow direct public criticism of his decisions. Okay, so basically direct public political criticism of his of his administration. So that's something as well that Frederick the Great is giving policies of religious toleration. And he's saying, like, you know what, when it comes to intellectual and religious matters, then argue as much as you want to. So the thing here is that, Kant is supporting the enlightened argument, okay, that basically Frederick the Great is is a champion of the Enlightenment. So the thing here, note here that this document might be a little bit more difficult to use if you don't know anything about Frederick the Great. Okay, so as we're going through here, it may or may not be the best buddy for Montesquieu. But one thing is, usually when the creator of the DBQ is making the DBQ, is setting up the DBQ, then the creator of the DBQ is already thinking about documents that can be put together. Now, here we see here Denis Diderot, French philosopher, Le Eleutherimon. Now, notice that we've got that little asterisk there. Published posthumously in 1795. Now we're going to go down and we're going to look here. A maniac or fanatic for liberty. Okay. And so Diderot, now you might even know about the encyclopedia, right? So he says here, at this point in time, a throne wavers. The frightened, trembling desperation of a furious people, the idiotic despot, knows, now you should know like the term despot, because sometimes this is called enlightened despotism rather than enlightened absolutism, knows the vanity of the alleged pact. Okay, so basically we see here the alleged pact. This is already showing that Diderot is not a fan of monarchy. He's saying at this point in time, a throne wavers. Okay. And so one thing to note here is when a poem or something is being quoted, this is something here that, you don't necessarily have to read it all, but kind of skim it. Okay. Answer sovereign, who dictated this pact, who signed it, who is subscribed. So he is referring to social contract theory, right? Who made this? Now also, you could bring in Thomas Hobbes, as context or something like this. In which cave did one draw up the act, or even Locke. If you think about this, this is something that I think that he's clearly influenced by Locke's idea of the social contract, that this must be drawn up by people. A legitimate government must be drawn up here. So then I'm starting to think, oh, I've got some outside evidence. I could bring in John Locke. This is someone else who is saying that, a constitutional government is the only government for a free people. And so the man did not sacrifice his rights. Okay. And so we see here, nature made neither servant nor master. I do not want to give nor receive laws. All right. And so, and his hand would braid the priest entrails for the lack of a rope to strangle kings. Now, when we look at this, this is a great buddy for Montesquieu. Now, this really, I'm walking you through it, so it takes me longer to explain it than it would for you to do it. But watch this. So we go to document 7 and we look at Diderot. Okay, so when we look at document 7 and we look at Diderot, we see here that we have found a buddy. Okay, because Diderot, argues that monarchy, is illegitimate. Okay, so it's illegitimate because people did not agree to it. Okay. Someone who loves freedom, would want to kill kings, not obey them. Okay. So not obey them. Now, the argument supported here is, of course, absolutist. Okay. And then when we think about this, we could go into some historical context. Now, historical context is great for, if you have a lot of historical knowledge. If you're one of those people who knows the material, historical context is always going to be your backup here. But then, if it's not so much, I would recommend for the most part purpose analysis. Okay, so historical context would be basically that Diderot was the editor of the encyclopedia. Okay. Now also the other thing that we could say here, another piece of historical context, he was, supported by Catherine the Great. So that's something, if you wanted to use historical context to call Diderot something of a hypocrite, that Diderot is writing about how the lover of liberty will braid, a priest intestines to strangle kings. But then Diderot is taking generous support from Catherine the Great. So that would be something where you could use historical context to call what Diderot's writing into question. Now, you could also think about that this is a poem, so it may be, when we think about the when you write a poem, you're not necessarily writing a full exposition, but then purpose, this is something that you could say here. His purpose is to basically, to state his opposition, okay, to monarchy as a form of government. And particularly, I would say here, absolute monarchy. Now, as far as that goes, then we start to think about, okay, so when we found these two buddies, okay, so Montesquieu and Diderot, we're going to make them buddies. And what's going to happen here is that we're going to be thinking about, Enlightenment philosophers, okay, so philosophers believed that absolute monarchy absolute monarchy is not compatible with freedom, okay, with freedom, which was the overall goal of the Enlightenment, okay. So we note here that Enlightenment philosophers, they did this. Now, then we've got document 1, Montesquieu, and document 7, you've got, Diderot, and then we can add outside evidence, we can add John Locke, okay, so we can add John Locke. And so what we're noting here is we've got an argument that we can use this all to support an argument. So what we're going to say here is that, and this is how we would construct our body paragraph. So what I did is I found 2 documents that seem to be in conversation with each other. And that's another thing that this exam, for those of you who are, preparing, whether it's this year or another year to take AP English language, putting the documents in conversation with each other is always going to be a good bet. So I found like 2 buddies that could sit by each other and have a conversation. Now, they could also disagree with each other, but in this case, it's usually easiest to find people who are saying the same thing. So with that, we're going to see here that Enlightenment philosophers, believe that absolute monarchy was not compatible with freedom, okay, because it did not allow, for people to exercise their liberties, okay. And so we're going to note here, Montesquieu, okay, so Montesquieu, wrote, okay, so Montesquieu wrote that when powers are not divided, okay, that when government power is not, is not divided, people cannot be free because this government has absolute power over them, okay, and this will make people afraid to express themselves, okay? So we're going to note here, that is, of course, document 1. And now that I've done this, what I've done so far is I've got here a topic sentence, okay? So when we look here, I've got a topic sentence. We'll go ahead and just give that a, just a light purple, highlight there. Now, Montesquieu wrote that, you have to separate powers in order for people to, in order for people to feel safe, okay? So when we look at this, we are referencing the document. Now, what I'm going to say here is that Montesquieu's work was widely read, and he was one of the, of the most respected, political philosophers of the Enlightenment. Okay, so his, his viewpoint, on absolutism and freedom should carry a lot of weight. Okay, so should carry a lot of weight. So that's what we're looking at here. Now, this is where I have done my, my point of view analysis. Okay, so this is putting out a point of view analysis. Now I'm going to go on to Diderot. Okay, so Diderot, another French Enlightenment philosopher. Okay, and or if you want to be fancy, you can put philosophe here, right? So another French Enlightenment philosophe, wrote that monarchy is illegitimate because people never agreed to it. Okay, so people never agreed to it. So never agreed to it. He also wrote that someone who loves freedom should want to kill kings rather than obey them. Okay, and so we would look here at document 7. So in this case, document 1 and document 7, they buddied up very well together, and we're going to see here that what we're so we're going to make this we're going to oops, nope, not there. Okay, not there. All right, so with that, we are going to have this here. Nope, not all right. So with that, there we go. Okay, so there we go. And so this rather than obey them. Now, so then I'm going to also provide a bit of historical context here, where we're going to note that Diderot, published the encyclopedia, which was an effort to get information available to the public without any control by the church or state authorities. Okay, so the encyclopedia was banned in France, which can explain why Diderot was not a fan of absolute monarchy. Okay, so that we're going to see here that we did some analysis here, we did some historical context. Now with Montesquieu, it was more like POV going into his authority. Okay, why do I keep doing that? All right, so with that, coffee hasn't quite kicked in yet. All right, so with that, then I'm going to go into some outside evidence. Okay, so this goes along with John Locke's view of the social contract. Okay, so the social contract, which states that governments exist that to protect life, liberty, and property. Okay, so life, liberty, and property. Locke wrote that governments must have the consent of the governed. Okay, so the consent of the governed, and that, okay, so Locke wrote that governments must have the consent of the government governed, and that people have a right to overthrow governments. Okay, governments that are oppressive. Okay, so that are oppressive and not protecting their rights. Okay, this would be an example of how to do outside evidence. Okay, so what I've done here is I've used 2 documents, and I have put this in there, and I've created this outside evidence. Okay, so I've got a topic sentence, then I'm referencing a document. Now the reference here is supporting the claim in the topic sentence. Now, if we don't use 6 documents, we're not technically going for that support point, but I think you should write your essay, because you never know when you might get lucky and 6 documents make sense to you. So you should always be writing your essay as if you're going for full credit. Okay, so we see here that we've got a topic sentence, then we've got 2 documents that agree with each other, and then we've given some analysis here, and then we follow this with outside evidence. Okay, and so then let's think about when we're thinking about buddying up. Okay, so we had here Charles III, the King of Spain, right? So Charles III, the King of Spain, says here that I've decided to remove from all my dominions in Spain and the Indies and the Philippine Islands and adjacent dominions, all members of the Society of Jesus. Okay, now one thing that we would note here, and this might take a bit of a bit of outside evidence, but you should know who the Jesuits are. Okay, so if we go back to the course and exam description. Okay, so that's a DBQ there. or is, okay, so the Jesuits, okay, so if we're looking for Jesuits, okay, so note here, the Jesuit order, okay, this is, you know, in the blue, okay, so you should know something about the Jesuits and how they constantly meddle in things, okay, that the Jesuits, especially at this time, they're not just, you know, sitting in a monastery praying or something like that. They are actively influencing governments, okay? And of course, Voltaire was not a big fan of the Jesuits in general. And so as far as this goes, we're going to note here that enlightened absolutists, okay, absolutists, you know, attempted to implement Enlightenment ideas. Okay, so what we're going to see here is that we saw, I believe that was document 4, and that was the King of Spain, Charles III of Spain. Probably not somebody that you would be familiar with. You know, Charles III of Spain, you know, expels Jesuits, okay? So, and here you can go for historical context, okay? So when we look at document 4, and let me see what we've got here real quick. All right, so with that, do you have any tips to manage your time since this is a particular challenge? Yeah, so the tip to manage your time here, we've got somebody in the chat asking about that. What I'm doing here is I'm modeling a time saver. Okay, so I'm modeling a time saver. You'll notice that with what I'm putting together, I have not looked at all of the documents. Now, if you will do, I recommend that if somebody somebody's trying to make a 4 or 5, they should be doing 2 DBQs a week. If they're wanting to make a 3, they should be doing a DBQ a week, or writing 1 DBQ and setting up another one. Okay, so that's another thing to think about there. Writing 1 DBQ and setting up another DBQ is something that, you know, would be good for you, because a lot of people are losing time on the setups. Okay, and so with this, you know, keep in mind that this is taking me longer to explain than it is going to take you to actually do it. Like if I were actually doing this, this would be something that would be super quick. Okay, it's always going to be more difficult to model something. So what we're doing here, if we're running out of time, it's thinking in terms of trying to tell a story with you know, using only like 4 documents. So when we see here, Charles III expels Jesuits, okay? And what we're going to note here is that, you know, we're going to say that this is enlightened, okay? Because basically he's expelling the Jesuits not to, you know, of course, Spain is a Catholic country. And so when he's expelling the Jesuits, he's not striking at Catholicism or religious liberty. He is expelling an order that's really against the principles of the Enlightenment. Remember, if you've ever read Candide, the Jesuits are always the bad guys in the Enlightenment. So when we see this, you know, he expels the Jesuits, and enlightenment, you know, so he's enlightened because he is promoting, you know, toleration and secularism. Okay, so some, you know, at least some sort of limited secularism. And so we would note here, historical context, you should know something about the Jesuit order, okay? And then when we're looking here, next document, so Joseph II, the Holy Roman Emperor, okay, Edict of Toleration for the Jews of Lower Austria. So since it is our purpose to make the Jews more useful, serviceable to the state, principally giving their children better instruction, employing them in science, we permit and command the tolerated Jews in places where they have no German schools of their own to send their children to the Christian upper elementary schools so that they shall learn at least reading, writing, and arithmetic. Okay, so basically they're saying here, you know, although they have no synagogue of their own in our capital, we permit them to build for their children at their own expense a normally equipped school with teaching staff of their own religion, which shall be subject to the same control as German schools here. Now, as far as that goes, if I've found something I can use, and this is a time saver, I'm not necessarily going to keep reading, okay, because I've gotten here something that I can use. I'm looking at the useful portion of the document. So when I look at document 5, we see here that Joseph II, okay, so Joseph II, so basically Joseph II allows Jews to attend Christian operated schools and to set up their own school in Vienna. Okay, and so we see here enlightened. Okay, so enlightened, and then we could go into this or not, thinking about, I mean, we've already got 3, so that's another thing to save time. If you know that your 3, your 3 caps are good, you might not necessarily have to go into that. Okay, but we could say here that, remember that Joseph, one thing to note here is, if we were going into this historical context, that Joseph's, ambitious reforms tended to have the least effect because they were not supported by the nobility. That's something, if you've got something to throw in there. Now, so with this, what I've got here is I've got another little short story I can tell here. Okay, so document 5, when we go to document 5, we see that Joseph II, okay, so Joseph II, tolerates Jews. Okay, so then what we're noting here is enlightened absolutists attempted to do this. Now, this would probably be my first paragraph. Okay, and we're going to basically just combine these 2 paragraphs to make a thesis statement. So watch this. Okay, so this is where, and this is, we don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to go in pretty quickly here. So enlightened absolutists attempted to implement Enlightenment ideas, especially when it came to religion. Okay, so we see that Charles III of Spain expelled the Jesuits from his kingdom. Okay, so we're going to note here that is document 4, and then we say here that that since Spain was a Catholic country, Charles was not being intolerant as much as expelling a group that was known for promoting intolerance and and trying to reconvert Protestants. Okay, so reconvert Protestants. The Jesuits were very unpopular with Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire. Okay, so we're going to note here, and again, what we've done here is topic sentence. All right, so we've got the topic sentence, then we've got, we are actually, oops, okay, so the topic sentence is here. All right, so the topic sentence is there. Then we've got, we've got a valid reference to the document. And then here, we're going to see that we have, we have our historical context there. And then we see here that Joseph II of Austria, issued a toleration edict for Jews, allowing them to attend Christian schools or establish their own schools. Okay, now as far as that goes, I've got now document 5. Now I can add my insurance on HIP, or I can say I've already got 3 and I'm running out of time, which we're running out of time here quite literally, so we're going to do that. And then basically I've got my thesis statement by combining these 2 together. Okay, so basically, although enlightened absolutists attempted to implement Enlightenment ideas such as religious toleration. Okay, so such religious toleration, so we say here that they were more absolutist than enlightened, because Enlightenment philosophs argued that absolutism and freedom could not coexist. Now, and I know as I'm doing this that there are Enlightenment philosophs that made other arguments, okay? But what I'm doing here, I'm not trying to make some argument that's going to, win on every level, but an argument that's going to, be able to be backed up by the evidence, okay? So we see here that we've got a thesis statement. We've got the first paragraph, the second paragraph. We would restate our thesis and add context. What I've got here would get 4 points: thesis, document usage, then your POV, HIP, cap, and then outside evidence. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, they've got another Saturday session coming up. So I'm going to go ahead and call it a day. And thank y'all for joining us. And we'll be back on same time next week. So noon on